The magic of the iPhone was the fact that it combines telephony, broadband, and disk storage. And each of those had reached a point of cost reduction and size reduction. So all of a sudden it got mashed together and boom, overnight, Nokia's best phone was irrelevant. Motorola's best phone was irrelevant. So that's kind of what happens. Different technologies go on this this exponential Moore's law of doubling in capabilities at equal or half the same price. And all of a sudden they intersect.
Welcome to the Felt Experience podcast, where we discuss with some of the world's leaders and advocates how the physical environments of where we live, work, and are educated can profoundly impact our physical, psychological, and emotional health and well-being. I'm Melissa Henschke, founder and director of Archetypes of Interiority. Welcome to the Felt Experience. In today's episode, we will talk to Rex Miller about organisational transformation and how the physical environment plays a pivotal role in the future of work. Rex Miller is a distinguished expert in optimising human and team performance, strategic foresight and organisation transformation, with over 40 years of experience in our industry and 20 years of experience as a consultant and coach. Rex has identified the key trends that will shape the future of work, making him a sought-after thought leader in the industry. Recognised with prestigious awards such as IFMA's Distinguished Author Award, Coronet's Industry Excellence, and Global Innovator Awards, Rex is acclaimed for his ability to guide large capital project teams to work efficiently, lower costs, cut waste, and drive change in a broken industry. As a visionary futurist, he created the Mindshift process to address deep-rooted, systematic obstacles, catalysing transformative changes in various sectors, including integrated capital projects, education, workplace engagement, and corporate wellness. His innovative approach offers efficient and impactful alternatives to traditional practices. Rex also created the Genius Spark process and software, which has helped more than 19,000 individuals optimize their strengths. His Resilience Lab podcast is hosted on the Imagine a Place platform. Recently, he opened River Rose, a leadership ranch in Glen Rose, Texas, 2 hours south of Dallas. Rex is a TX A&M Business Fellow and a USPTA Certified Tennis Professional. His collaborations with industry giants such as Google, Microsoft, PepsiCo, CBRE, Gensler, GoDaddy, and the International Well Building Institute further attest to his expertise and practical impact. And today, Rex Miller joins us on the Felt Experience. Welcome to the Felt Experience, and I feel very privileged to have you this morning in Adelaide, and I don't know what time it is where you're from, but thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Actually, we're getting ready to watch a beautiful sunset. So it's about 6:30, and then the sun is going down. So it might get a little bit, the lighting might get a little orange, which is great for sleeping. That helps your circadian rhythm.
Well, let's dive in. With over 40 years of experience in the field of strategic foresight and organisational transformation, what are the key trends shaping the future of work?
Well, we just lived through a major disruption, but getting underneath it. So there's always a lag between technological capabilities that get pent up, and then something happens that bursts it open. And then we go through this radical conflict revolutionary process. We've been able to do distributed work since the early 90s, when the internet was established. And so there's a lag time because we're still living very, very much in the old mindset and model of an industrial organization. Command and control, departments, linear flow of work, all of those things are a holdover, and it goes into the education system, and it goes into our democracy, the way bills go. And so now with the disruption, what's happened is, oh, we discovered we could work distributed. And now we're going through the ripple effect of what does that mean? What does it look like? And you've got these huge debates going on between, is it good or bad? Is remote good or bad? And you just heard Amazon just said 5 days a week, you're coming back in. So we've got what we call this wicked problem. And a wicked problem is defined as things that are differing tensions that are interrelated. And if you touch one of them, it ripples through with unintended consequences. So as Amazon tries to enforce a policy, well, it's going to ripple through and have unintended consequences. At the same time, companies that let people just go free range work, just wherever you want, well, they're going to find that the glue that used to hold them together, which was proximity, that was the glue. They're going to find that if they did not also have a very clear, cohesive culture, that those companies will have a hard time getting alignment. It'll become less efficient. There'll be, very differing standards of how they apply what you might call accountability. So we're in this who knows phase. Mm-hmm. When the Gutenberg printing press launched, within a decade, it was already revolutionary, but we had 150 years of war, of overthrowing monarchies, and until the Treaty of Westphalia. And the significant implication of the Treaty of Westphalia was the first time we started constituting governments based on principles and ideas versus power or tradition or lineage. Radical shift. And that changed everything. That changed mercantilism, that changed the ability to think through science, just the printed word itself. We're going through Clay Shirky, who is a futurist and a communications expert at he's either Columbia or NYU, says that he's anticipating about 50 years of global disruption.
Wow.
And we've seen little bits of that, like the Arab Spring, right? So the Arab Spring was the ability to coordinate activity without going through any centralized filters. And so we had 14 governments overthrown. Now, the problem with the Arab Spring is that they knew what they didn't want, but they didn't have anything cohesive holding it together for a better new future. And that's the danger we run into as we're doing these experiments and people are pushing off the constraints. So it's a fascinating time. And we've seen how technology has actually affected our elections in the United States. President Obama was the first, what you might call Facebook president. You go back to President Kennedy, he was the first television president.
Wow.
And his debate with President Kennedy was the defining difference in the election. And people who listened to the Nixon-Kennedy debate through radio felt like Nixon won because of his voice and his command of the material. But in a broadcast medium, it rewards presence, your charismatic presence and your smile. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. Donald Trump was the first Twitter president. That was his way of bypassing the conventional ways of connecting with his audience. And now we're seeing it just go nuts with AI and, deep fakes, and who knows what the new one is going to be. But it's a real existential issue for the United States in terms of the future of democracy. And companies are no different. They're holding on. Here's what typically happens. Here's what I'm projecting. We're going to have 15 years where new companies are going to figure out we can do this faster and cheaper because of the technology. And we're not going to have the legacy infrastructure or traditions or command structure. And so these new, faster companies are going to rise. And then, you'll see the new Netflixes arise and the new Ubers arise and the new Airbnbs arise. And, Google's in jeopardy, right?
Wow.
Google has one main revenue stream, and that's ads on search. AI is beginning to disrupt that. So nobody has, no one has promised longevity. In 1960, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company was 60 years. Now it's less than 15 years. So if companies, and so here's the challenge. You've got a capability, a tool, and the tool has some inherent advantages over other tools. And when it becomes dominant, it wins. But it only wins if you adopt the social technology that goes with the technology.
Exactly.
So if you've got a screwdriver and you're trying to pound things, well, the social technology with a screwdriver is the behavior is you turn it. So we haven't developed that. When architects first had CAD, computer-aided design, they were still designing like they were drawing things. And then building information modeling came in, and they still thought it was a design tool rather than a social collaborative modeling tool. And it took time for that to shift. So that's a long, several rabbit trails I went on. But we're at a moment as significant as the Gutenberg printing press in terms of the radical shift. And the difference is it's not just Europe, it's global. And we'll start seeing some of the stress fractures in the dams that are holding things back. We saw that with perestroika, and one of the big means of being able to break loose from the Russian bloc was the ability to have cassette tapes and transport those. So we're in this fascinating time, and who knows? There will be a few people who can have their cake and eat it too. Maybe Amazon is one of those. We can still be, because we're so far out ahead, that we can still demand people to come in, but those will be rare. And somewhere it's going to be kind of a secession as the younger people come up. Underneath the nature is you've got immigrants and natives. In other words, you've got distributed natives, people who grew up with social mobile. Then you got immigrants like me, and the immigrants are in charge. So the natives understand more what the world is and how it works and how to optimize it than the people in charge. And that's an interesting challenge that we have. Was that the start you were looking for? I don't know.
Oh, it's mind-blowing. We could go down so many different rabbit holes, and it's mind-blowing, and it's awe-inspiring. It's scary. It's a roller coaster. But really we need to be grounded and look at from my point of view at least, the human-centered approach.
Yes.
The human needs to be at the center of all technology.
And that's always the battle, right?
Exactly.
So the story of Frankenstein is the age-old challenge of you build something and then all of a sudden it becomes a monster. And the challenge, and I'm going back to a book in the 1980s called Megatrends, but John Nesbitt had a chapter called High Tech, High Touch. There's a human sensibility that as things become more technologically driven, it has to be counterbalanced by an equal level of human interaction. And Ivan Illich called it convivial tools. So that goes back to the 30s. And what a convivial tool is a tool that builds our relationships together. And when he was talking, it was the telephone. And so the telephone can either be an intrusion if it's a telemarketing person during dinner, or if it's your mother, then that's convivial. So learning the new rules of these relationships and the community structures and how do
Mhm.
we nurture those?
Mhm.
And how do we vet and validate what's true? And who are the wisdom sources in our midst? It's all been thrown out, and now we've got to rebuild it again.
That segues us into the next question. From your lens, what does the future look like for work environments and how can organizations adapt?
So I think there's going to be mashups. We've had these artificial barriers, like these tracking devices. This device tells me the level of stress I'm experiencing, my recovery level, my heart rate variability, and if we wanted to, we could put my strengths, my Gallup Clifton strengths or my Myers Briggs or whatever. We could have all this formative data. And then as you and I interact, it can monitor whether I'm more engaged with you, productive, if I'm in a meeting. And so it can begin telling me where I'm most effective, what kind of work I'm most effective in,
Mm-hmm.
how I'm most effective. And now we've got environments that will also sense when we're here. We already have it. It's Minority Report, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can go into a casino today and you can wear a wristband, and as you're walking by, it'll know that you want to see, let's see, you want to see Bobby McFerrin. It knows that. And Bobby McFerrin happens to be here. And so as you're walking by the screen, it'll just pop it up. I was in a company that linked their Fitbits to exercise routines. And when you went into the exercise room, it would automatically pull up your progress and the cohort you were competing with and show you where everybody else was before you got on your cycle or whatever it is. So we have these tremendous capabilities. And in the book, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, I write about that scenario. That's, yeah, there you go.
I
That
love this
scenario.
book. It's so awesome.
Well, but so that was written in 2015. And we were talking about these kinds of capabilities back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only a matter, remember, the iPhone, the magic of the iPhone was the fact that it combines telephony, broadband, and disk storage. And each of those had reached a point of cost reduction and size reduction to all of a sudden it got mashed together and boom, overnight, Nokia's best phone was irrelevant. Motorola's best phone was irrelevant. So that's kind of what happens. Different technologies go on this this exponential Moore's law of doubling in capabilities at equal or half the same price. And all of a sudden they intersect. Ray Kurzweil calls it the singularity. And he's projecting somewhere in 2050 that we will not be able to know where the human begins and the machine begins because we'll be so, yeah, we are already augmented humans, right? I've got LASIK. I've got a band that tells me when to go to bed at night if I want to have optimal sleep. So if we just project where does that logically go overall, we're going to have these buddies. So in a book I wrote called Humanizing the Education Machine, we crafted something called an ILBI, an interactive intelligent learning buddy. And it was essentially the same thing for a student. And a student, and so it would monitor how you perform on a written test, getting up in front of class. Do you learn better in dialogue, on your own, whatever it is. And it would measure your heart rate and your stress, and it'll begin learning you, and then it'll begin guiding you. And then it's like having a permanent coach on your side. This is a coach. I've had this since 2016. And then there's this Oura Ring thing. It doesn't dictate to me, but if I'm out with clients and it says, if you want to be optimal, your bedtime is this time, I will pick up my app and I'll show them, say, we got two choices tonight. I'm having a great time, happy to stay with you. But if you want me to be my best tomorrow in our workshop, I need to leave in 10 minutes. I've never had a client say, no, stay with us. We don't want you to be your best. So these things used properly help us to be our best self. And that's why athletes go through this monitoring and analytics. Well, all of this is now becoming accessible to everybody. And then it's going to be built into the buildings, the smart buildings, and we're going to know, where you are in voice inflection. We've got technology that knows voice inflection, can interpret whether it's a safe environment or not a safe environment. So it is moving towards Minority Report. And this is a great thing to go search, but there is a YouTube on the things that Minority Report were ahead of and where they are today.
Okay.
And it's amazing. So it's exciting. I'm excited. I'm going to be 70 in January, but it still excites me.
It's incredible.
Well, and from a longevity standpoint, Dr. Roizen wrote a book just came out this year. I can't remember the title, but he looks at 10 developments in medicine that are going to completely change the game. And he says that if you can live to the next 10 years, the advances in medicine are going to give you another 10 years. Whatever your longevity was, you're going to get a boost of 10 years on that. And then think of the ripple effect working. I'm working on succession planning with a company where the mandatory retirement age of the managing director is 62 years of age. We've got all these structures and traditions that just don't make sense. And what I think we're going to find, because Australia is similar in demographics to the United States, we've got a huge drop-off in productive workers coming.
Totally. Especially here in Adelaide, we were known as the baby boomers. As soon as they drop off, we're going to have this big gap in knowledge.
Right.
And how does that affect the next generation? Well, hugely. And how are they going to transfer their knowledge over? Or is it just going to, they put the baton down and it's all over? Yeah, so it's really interesting times.
Well, and think now today, you've got 12, 13, 14-year-olds creating companies and inventing, and you've got, there's the book called Late Bloomers, and I'm in that late bloomer category. I'm just getting into my sweet spot, and they talk about that people in their 60s and 70s, that's their most productive time living. And you shift from fluid logic, you shift from this kind of crystal logic where you're a subject matter expert to fluid logic where there's more connections in your brain. So it's more a wisdom shift. And if we can learn, now I don't want to work the 50, 60 hours a week that I did growing up, and all that, but good 30 hours. If there's a structure, now I've got my own enterprise and companies, but if I were an employee and I had the choice and I could be productive and the software could help manage asynchronous work, we could, overnight, we could add 20% to the workforce in terms of qualified, competent people.
What is your human-centered approach to how we create more engaging and productive work and learning environments and experiences?
Well, I begin with the basis that we want to help people do what they naturally do best and enjoy most. And in other words, play to your strengths. So some of the research that we've done, and one of the assessments we like to use, because psychometric tools have become a real innovation in terms of understanding how someone can be their best self. And I particularly like the Clifton strengths because it's measuring the fastest, strongest parts of your brain. So I'm going to answer it in two pieces. When you're activating those natural parts of your brain, you're releasing positive hormones. Dopamine first. So that's the fun. I enjoy this. I want to do more. Endorphins when you're in that flow state. Serotonin when you and I are having a good flow of a conversation. That's that psychological safety, connection feeling. And then oxytocin is like a flow state in relationships. So the research shows that when you can do that, then you're engaged. It's natural engagement. The other part, too, is that we were all geniuses before we went to school. During the 70s, the Apollo program, George Land, and he's a legend, developed an assessment for NASA called the Imaginative Index to pick the best and brightest. And it was a very simple assessment. I'm going to hold up a Skippy Crunchy. I don't know if you've got sponsors, but now you've got a sponsor. And the question was, how many uses can you think of this? And they measured the number of answers, the novelty of the answers, and the usefulness of the answers, and gave it a score. Well, he said, this is so easy, I can give it to preschoolers. And I wonder what would happen. So in the United States, there's a program called Head Start. Head Start is for kids in at-risk communities. It was started in the 1960s. And so he gave this assessment to 1,600 kids, and it blew them away. 98% of them tested as geniuses. So the next question is, I wonder what's going to happen over time. Now, the next big event is they start going to school. 5 years later, when they were 10 years old, it dropped from 98% to 30%. When they were 15 years old, it dropped to 10%. When they were 30 years old, it dropped to 2%. So you and I have this dormant potential in there that usually pops out when I'm coaching people. The misalignment usually comes in some midlife crisis. And what's really happening is there are things I know I'm designed to do, but I'm trapped, or I don't know what I want to do, all these kinds. And the pandemic just kind of took it from a chronic issue to an acute issue. Now, so back to the Clifton Strengths. So the Clifton Strengths is one assessment, and there's others, that gives you a roadmap back to those things you naturally do best and enjoy most that have not been developed, that have become dormant. And then the human-centered approach is, how do we rekindle that? And we use sports science for that. And sports science is very simple. And it's similar to cognitive behavior therapy. Are you familiar with how that works? Where, they look at, what's the story you're telling yourself, right? And is it working for you? And if that's not working, let's create a better story. And let's reinforce that story. Well, the Clifton Strengths gives you a range of traits. And what we've developed, and it's called Genius Spark, is a software that helps you take those traits and turn it in to a portrait of who you are at your best. And so just like Michael Phelps would do, is he would imagine his performance, visualize it, and he would go through much more elaborate process than what we use. But there's a couple things that are happening. We all strive to want to be our best self. That's what Maslow said. So the human-centered approach is, that's what we're designed to do. And if we can't, Maslow described it as a drowning man, that it's not that he's compelled, he has to search for becoming that best self. And then that got turned into the pyramid, and it was never a pyramid, but there's this levels of self-growth or actualization that we call. So now we have a way of giving you a way to do that. It's not just go sit in a cave and meditate. Now we've got true description. This is how you're wired to be your best. And if you think of your day as a performance, you've got a picture of that. Now the question is, how do I show up at my best for the felt experience today? And then I'll read the description of what it should look like. And then that activates something in the brain called the reticular activator. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but your brain is designed to do two things well. it gets you what you want. It's a goal-seeking organ or save you from what will kill you. It's as simple as it is. And that's the foundation of behavioral economics. Knowing that the brain is the largest calorie consumer is only going to tap in to the most important thinking when it's important to you or life-threatening. And then those nudges they talk about and all that is to take advantage of when you're in a default mode kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So now if we take the sports science and I read my paragraph in the morning and then I ask the question and I've activated this part of my brain called the reticular activator. Do you drive?
Yes, I do.
Now in the United States, it's becoming very popular to not drive. So, and for me, I can't imagine that. Right. But can you remember the first car that you wanted? Or a recent car that you really wanted?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. So you may have experienced seeing those cars around more frequently than normal. Okay. That's all it is. You have a desire and your brain can't take everything in, so it selectively filters what it lets in. So what if we gave you a picture of what you would look like at your best? Okay. And you reinforced that, and then you tied it in the evening with reflecting on actual experience of, wow, that felt good. So it's real easy. Whenever you experience that dopamine or endorphins, now you're connecting the feeling, the act, and the description together, and your brain just takes it in, and that's how you program a brain. That's how you train it. Whether it's an athlete or whatever. I'm a certified tennis professional, and that's it's repetition. Right? It's a musician. It's repetition. So the next part of that is purpose, right? The human-centered part. There's a lot out there about finding your why, and I love Simon Sinek, but I think that's the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
Because what it leads to is going off searching for things, getting a motorcycle and driving through Europe and all that, eat, pray, love, all that. And there's no research that backs that up. Now, what we say, let's start with who you are. Let's start with who. Let's know who I am. It's Aristotle, know thyself. Let's know who I am at my best, at my essence. What do I tingle over and why? Because I understand my wiring. And then the research out of Stanford with two professors, they created the most popular course in Stanford, and it's called Designing Your Life. And because we've had a generation of kids, when I was growing up and I went to college in the early 70s, I wasn't looking for my purpose. That wasn't even on the table. My dad said, you got 4 years to graduate and get a job. Okay, that's what we did. But now we've released, we've opened Pandora's box and said, everyone's got to find their bliss or their purpose and all of that. And we've spent 20 years chasing that with all the books and the meditations and walking on coals and all these things. None of that works. But what does work is becoming masterful at something. Mastery leads to fulfillment, and fulfillment leads to purpose. And that's what these professors found. So if you know how you're wired at your best, doesn't matter necessarily what you do, as long as you approach it the way you're wired to do it. I did not choose to be a project manager. I was a tennis pro out of college, met a girl, needed a job. Someone in our church said, we're going through this new thing. These cubicles are brand new. None of the architects want to deal with it because it's beneath them. We need somebody to do all that. I became a project manager at 24. But I became masterful at it, and that opened doors. And then another door opened and another door opened. So there's no way to know which avenue you take, but if you take the approach to always show up at your best, ultimately it's going to lead to fulfillment to purpose and serving others, because that's what Maslow said is the natural link. So what we've tried to do is simplify the process so anybody can do it. And all these workshops and things like that, that was my big frustration in the kind of work we do. Do a workshop, people would love it, and then it's what do we do with it now?
Yeah, there's no next goal.
Right. And people feel like, well, he can do it, but I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you had a clear picture of what you look like at your best? And every day you could ask yourself the question after this podcast, how did I show up? Was I at my best? What did that look like? What did it feel like?
Mm-hmm.
And then go back through and reinforce the good part. Then you might ask, well, how did I get in my way? And then go through. Now, I don't spend a lot of time, unless I have something that really bombs. And I do. A client call or something like that, conflict resolution that goes sideways. And then I'll go back through and say, okay, what did I feel in that moment? How did I respond? What part of my strengths worked against me in there?
Mm-hmm.
What would I do differently? And that's it. That's the formula.
Next question, I'm going to use a quote from Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill,
I know the quote,
said, "We shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us." How do you shift leaders' mindsets to see the value proposition that space matters? So we've talked about the organisational part and the positive mindset and how we can use technology to help us rewire our program, and how they make us feel is important to our physical, psychological, and emotional health and well-being.
So do you know the backstory of that quote?
No.
So after World War II, the House of Commons was destroyed. And there were a lot of plans being fostered on having a House of Commons in the round to foster collaboration. And Winston Churchill said that our democracy is based on adversarial debate. That's what makes us strong, is taking an idea and looking across to the other person. And he said, we will lose the core of who we are with that. And then he said, we shape our buildings and then they shape us. So if it was so vital to understand our DNA as a democracy and how the building would forever alter that, then when we look at space today, we have to begin looking at the needs. So we need flexibility. That came out of the pandemic. People need flexibility, caretaking, and all of that. We're social animals. We need to be connected. We have to focus. And so I think we're going to start seeing spaces double down on, if it's a social space, it's a very social space. If it's a focused space, everything in it tells you that this is a place that you can do deep thinking, like going to a law library or something like that. You know how that feels when you go into a law library and you just feel like, I'm going to do some important thinking here. So instead of having this kind of blended, generic, open, we're going to see, I think, more dramatic spaces that really emphasize social connection. And I think, too, we will spend more time onboarding people. So Salesforce bought this huge retreat facility. And new employees go there and spend 8 weeks to just get in the culture. So this goes back to once you and I have relationship together, we've had a meal together, I've been to your house, then this is enough to rekindle that. The virtual is enough. So we're going to start thinking about, okay, how do we get smart about building that social connection with people, and then encouraging people to build, relationships around themselves. Gallup says in their Q12, the 6 item, and they've got 12 questions to determine engagement. And one of them is, do I have a best friend at work? And they have statistics that if you have a friend and colleague that you're connected to, you're 60% less likely to leave the company. But Dr. Martin Seligman, and you probably have the same challenges we have with loneliness. It takes 5 core people in your circle for resilience. And most people don't have 5 people they could call at 2 a.m. if they're stranded, and they would come. Or people who would get in your face and say, look, what you're doing is not right. Mm. So companies, because society has lost the ability to do that, companies are going to have to now start picking up and training social skills, training how to budget and finance and life skills and have life coaches. I don't know if Apple has the Genius Bar. I don't know if you remember the Genius Bar. So Apple Computer, when I first got my Apple, and this was in the early days of their stores, you could get a $99 membership and go once a week to talk to an Apple Genius one-on-one on anything you wanted. Yeah, they don't do that anymore because they found that's not a smart business plan. No. But I took full advantage of it. I had 299 members. So I was first name basis with all those guys. But my logo for Mindshift, my website, all this stuff, they helped me create it and do all of that stuff. So let's mash up some things here. And I call this the 4th place. So there's a book called The Long Tail. And the long tail is the economics of virtual bookshelves, for example. That most of the money that Amazon gets is not in the blockbusters, but in all these things that go infinite, that they get 5, 6, 7 people buy it at a time. Infinite shelf. Well, the talent in a workplace is your bookshelf. You only see certain things. So what's one hobby you love doing that you would consider, I'm masterful at this, or this is something I'm really, really good at?
Oh, wow. Creativity, making things, creating.
Oh, okay. So let's say I'm an engineer and I'm on the opposite side. Now, and I have to come up with a proposal to sell an idea. So what if we combined a couple things in this 4th place? You put up your opportunity. You've picked a couple calendar dates where you can provide creativity training. And I'm going through and I say, oh, here's a date that Melissa's open. And then we're linked together and we go to this place called the 4th place. And it's a combination of a barista, production center, like a podcast booth. It's got copiers and things you can make things. And now all of a sudden, you've got all this hidden potential in the company that's all this invisible stuff starts becoming visible. And you're getting to do what you love to do, engagement. I'm learning something that I've never been able to do before. We're building social capital at the same time. And it takes a place to put all that together. And in the United States, there was a book written in the 1980s called Bowling Alone, and it talked about the loss of institutions and places that built that social capital. Starbucks marketed themselves on the concept called the 3rd place, the place between work and home where you go to connect with people. There was an American TV show called Cheers. That was essentially where everybody knows your name. Well, now let's take that to another notch and let's create things together. And it could be code for an app. I got this idea for an app, but I have no idea to code it. That would be great for the company. Or learning how to put presentations together, or public speaking, or going to Italy. It's our 45th anniversary and we've never been to Italy, and I have no way to know. Well, somebody's been there 15 times.
Hmm.
So we come to the fourth place and we build community. We create assets for the company.
Hmm.
We build relationships. And then we need sacred places,
Hmm.
right? You need places that just cause you to pause. And this is where nature would be, or high views and stuff like that.
Hmm.
William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So part of the challenge with corporate place is we're just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
It's just a variation of the same. But if we went to school, if we looked at some of the most creative schools, or if we went to some sacred places, or we went to a performance venue, like a training facility for a professional sports team, and we started seeing what's going on there and translating that back into how would we create a place to live and work better together, then we could break through this imaginative gridlock that we're in and begin thinking freshly. The biggest challenge we have in the United States are how commercial buildings are built. That it's their pro formas and their cap tables, and so they're not built in a way that's human centered. They're
Hmm.
built to be able to uh, trade them as commodities in the marketplace. So we're really misaligned on our goals. So by the time we get to a building, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. We're trying to make something that was never built for humans to be in, and we're trying to just do the best we can with it.
Mm. Transactional as opposed to. Mm.
Totally.
Mm.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm sure the brokers in Australia are similar to ours.
Yeah.
It, you know, they're looking for square footage and amenities,
Hmm.
and it's a formula that they
Yeah.
play. And then an architect has to try to figure out, okay, how do we do the best we can? And then the company puts constraints on it because we've got standards that we've got to
Mm.
adhere to, and we've got
Standards,
certain
money.
contracts in
Yeah.
place.
Mm.
Right. So it begins to go downhill quickly.
Next question is, how can we use ubiquitous technology to create work and learning environments that continually engage, energize, and form new positive habits and norms?
Well, so this is a great opportunity for behavioral economics.
Hmm.
And there's some diet apps out there. One is Noom, Noom, that uses behavioral economics to nudge you into more positive behavior. So they baseline you,
Hmm.
and then they look at your habits and your times, and they just nudge you along the way to consider other habits. We have the technology to build better habits. We tend to ignore them if we have them. So this Internet of Things, wearables, and new practices in the workplace, where managers now need to be more like coaches.
Hmm.
The statistics are that only 18% of managers are wired or trained to be developmental, that 78% are task oriented managers.
Hmm.
And that's a huge problem there. So think about having to retrain a whole
Wow. Yes.
mid-management level. I mean, and so we're going back to originally where I said there's so many impediments for legacy companies
Hmm.
to overcome these, and some will do better than others,
Hmm.
but most will not be able to sustain overcoming the inertia that they've got. And then what happens in the normal survival of the things that are most fit is new organizations that solve these things better will begin to rise up and become the new crop of innovative companies that we saw coming up in the 90s and the early 2000s.
The adaptability.
Kodak used to be, yeah, Kodak. I mean, my father was involved in film. He was at a competitor of Kodak,
Hmm.
but went to, you know, Kodak is headquartered in Rochester, New York. My father went to Rochester Institute of Technology. Kodak was an icon. Their film, Kodachrome, Paul Simon, all of that. They also invented the digital camera in 1975.
And
Right.
that's not that long ago, really, when you think about it over the course of
Yeah.
events. Yeah.
But here's why technological development is so hard to watch. So the first version of it was 8K, okay? Grainy 8K, and it was a big bulky thing. Then a year it was 16K. Then in another year it was 32K. Then it was 64K. And so it wasn't until Casio came out when it was 256K with the first consumer version, and it was the equivalent of an $800 camera. And by that time, Kodak was so far behind, they could never catch up again. So keeping an eye on these technologies under the radar that are just getting a little better every year, every year, every year, and then they pop up.
Mm-hmm.
And by then, the iPhone obsoletes all the rest of the cell phones on the market.
My final question for you, Rex, is what's next for Rex Miller?
Well, so the ranch we purchased during the pandemic, and we estimate it's about a 20-year project for us. So I'll be in my 90s when we're starting to wind down. And the purpose of the ranch is to provide a place for leaders to come. We're turning it into a nonprofit, making it a community asset. It's a historical facility in a small town of 2,500, and in a town that has 9.5% unemployment, where the average income is 34,000 a year. And there's huge disparities. So you've got these huge ranchers, 10,000 acre ranches, and then you've got people that are, living, working at Taco Bell or a little manufacturing place, $17, $18 an hour. So there's a lot of need here. And we feel we were called, this was a mission to come down here
Mm-hmm.
and do that. So that's part of it. The second big mission is the genius spark that we talked about. How do we help people find and reignite that spark? So I published a book last year called Genius Spark. We've got a software that helps with that, and it's growing nicely. And the next step for me is to do something I've never done before, is to raise capital to accelerate that business. And then for me too, I'm at that point where I'm helping companies with succession planning. Got some very large companies where, I'm a trusted advisor to the president and the C-suite. And the key is, how do we grow that next level down?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we help the actual director or the president actually let go and create a life afterwards? That's a hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like Gollum in the Ring. The ring is their power and all of this, and unless they have something creative that they can go to, so you can't just take it away. They have to have something that's drawing them forward,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not traveling or playing golf. That doesn't do it for them.
No, it's that human connection and giving, somehow being of service still to the community.
Yes, and that's the hard part: is who am I now that I'm not the person flying all over the world, working 78 hours a week, solving all the problems, the hero of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I next?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the three big things: being planted in our community, and helping, bringing a place where leaders and teams can have refuge. So we do have a whole resilience side of our story here with the ranch, having restored this property. There's all kinds of lessons when you've had property that was overgrazed and burnt out and invasive species. The lessons from that alone to teams and companies, the parallels are just amazing. And when you bring people out into the nature and they can see and touch and feel, it's
mind blowing.
It's not your hotel resort. It's not meant to be that. It's meant to get you intimate with some of these things, and then get intimate with yourself and find out the things that are keeping you back in the process.
Thank you so much, Rex.
Oh, you're welcome. This is fun.
You've been phenomenal. I love all your research. I love everything you're bringing to the table and the phenomena that you are in this world is unparalleled. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's humbling to hear that. Like you, I wake up just to be myself and make a difference. And we're at such a critical point in history. And I've got enough perspective to know that we need to step up and we need to restore that human connection, restore community, just to get to a point of being able to have that civil interaction with one another. And I appreciate the platform and the forum you're providing and the invitation to come. And anytime you want to pick it up and take it into another area, like I said at the very beginning, I'm a wind-up toy, and just get me started in a direction and we'll be good. So thank you.
We'll get you over here to Australia.
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah, love that.
And shift the lens here.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
I hope you've enjoyed the latest episode of The Felt Experience. I'm Melissa Henschke, your host. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave any queries, questions you may have on the various platforms you've tuned in through. We look forward to seeing you next time.